Awesome. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode with me, not again, Dany Acosta. And today, every decade, we have amazing musicians that come out. Everything from Jimi Hendrix to the Beatles, from Led Zeppelin, and all the way, even now, right? We have Elevation Worship, Hillsong. But this decade, we have a breakthrough. We have the amazing, the talented, my pastor, Pastor Aaron Rios. How are you today?
Dany, thank you so much for having me, brother. What an introduction. Oh, man.
Yeah, man. It's a privilege to have you here, man. And today, we're going to be talking a lot about worship. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and uphill battles to a brand new book, Spirit and Truth, right? Reclaiming the Heart of Worship.
That's it.
And we'll be talking a little bit about some things that maybe Pastor doesn't know about yet, but it's going to be really good. So we'll be right back with Pastor Aaron Rios. Awesome. So, Pastor Aaron, how you been?
I'm doing great, Dany.
Yeah?
It's always trying to keep up with your energy.
Oh my gosh. Well, dude, congratulations on the brand new book, man.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about the title. What does it mean to you? And how long did it take you to write it?
Man, that's a great question. So the title of the book is Spirit and Truth, borrowing that from John chapter 4 out of the Bible. Reclaiming the Heart of Worship. Originally, the title of the book was Journeying to the Heart of Worship. So that phrase appears throughout the book. But we went with Reclaiming the Heart of Worship because I think that speaks to the greater tone of the book. And man, this book was a 7-year journey.
Wow.
In total honesty. Yeah. At one point, while writing this book, I actually lost the manuscript altogether. About 2 years into it, and was just ready to scrap it until someone encouraged me, pick it back up, write down what you can remember, and just go with it.
Yeah, dude. And tell us about the book cover.
Yeah. Oh no, it's a pretty simple abstract art on the cover.
Okay.
The intention is to just drive people into the text. Yeah.
Yeah. What color is the text?
Well, the book has a blue and gray. There's a big circle in the center with the title, Spirit and Truth, Reclaiming the Heart of Worship. Probably the coolest thing for me to look at on this book is my name.
Yeah.
To see my name attached to the book. In fact, as I was driving over here, I just saw my name on the side of the book, Rios. Just what an incredible feeling. And then, of course, the foreword on this book is by a friend of mine, Dr. Ken Stortz. Actually, the cool thing about that is some people have heard of the multi-platinum award-winning band Skillet, rock band. He was actually a founding member, and I met him as a young man. Man, I mean, when I was a kid. I'll tell you how old he is. But no, I remember we went to go see this band. We went down to the local Christian bookstore, and they were selling these tickets to a band called Skillet.
Yep.
We're like, what is a skillet? You know,
like a George Foreman grill?
Yeah. And so... Yeah, so we got these tickets. The tickets were $18. Now this is like 1995. Okay?
Oh dang, dude!
So I think $18 then is like $49.99 now or something wild like that. But I remember we went down to the local amusement park, which was in Panama City, Florida, and we showed up. And I'd been listening to their music. They were kind of like a grunge rock. They're still rock right now, but it was more kind of like Nirvana.
Yeah.
I remember that, their first album. And so we go out there. And it's this huge venue, and there was like 6 of us there. And but we stayed the whole concert. They played their heart out as if they were playing for 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And little would we know that 20 years later they would be playing for hundreds of thousands of people.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 15 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you already going to church at the time?
I was a worship leader in my church. I was really active in the youth group. Loved being in that environment. I didn't realize our youth group at that time was pretty radical, really different in the 90s. It wasn't like it is now with the way but we had like smoke machines in our youth group. We had like a rock band and pizza every Wednesday night. Little Caesars loved us in those days. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of pizza places love churches. Are like, all right, let's start a youth night around here.
I know
they're money making, and I think it's really important for also people to know, when did you start playing music? Because I think often musicians really do start at like 4 or 5 years old when they're like long-standing musicians. When they just kind of do it on the side, they probably start a little bit later. They kind of leave it on the side for a bit. But you are very talented in different instruments. So tell us about how do you get started and who influenced you to get started?
Wow, thank you so much. much. So like the journey for me began when I was about 4 years old. My mother noticed I love to take things apart and tinker with my hands. And, so she would like find toasters and things on the side of the road. And someone advised her, hey, he's got a lot of energy. So use that for his advantage. So she would get little appliances like toasters and I'd take them apart. Of course, I couldn't put them back together, which traumatizes me to this day. If I start taking something apart, I have a hard time taking the remote controller apart. Yeah. I'm not sure it's going to be put back together. But so I remember one day my mother, she used to clean this old Baptist church we used to attend. And the pastor's wife one day, she was in there, I think it was maybe a Sunday afternoon, and she was running through on the piano, the choir music. And my mother was trying to clean, and so Miss Mayo was her name. She said, well, why don't you leave him in here with me? And I was mesmerized as I watched this woman play the piano. And she called me to come close to her, and she showed me how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Do you remember her name?
Miss Mayo.
Miss Mayo. And do you still have and stay in touch with her?
Oh, she's passed away.
Wow.
This has been probably about over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Although I did have the privilege of reconnecting with her when I was a teenager.
Nice.
And because that was in Miami where I used to live. We moved out of Miami.
Yeah.
But she taught me Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then I came back a week later. My mom was cleaning again. And she said, do you remember what I taught you? And I said, yeah. And I sat down, and apparently I was able to play Mary Had a Little Lamb and embellished it. I started adding stuff to it. And she turns to my mother, and she says, you need to get him a piano. He's talented. I remember hearing that word. He's talented. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but it really was a deposit in my heart that would follow me the rest of my life. I think a lot of people don't believe in themselves. I think that when you ask people, do you have any talent? A lot of people will say, no, I don't have any talent. I don't have any skills. But for some reason, those words really carried a lot of weight and impacted me.
Wow. And so as you started to play, what were some of the bands back then that really influenced your music? Because in your book, you talk a lot about like input and output, right?
Yeah.
In the sense of worship, and whatever you consume is the way I see it, and you digest, you're going to... the weirdest word I was gonna say, you excrete it. But you kind of transcend it, right? In your music, you transcend it in what we do. I mean, I know as an author to an author, a lot of times what we experience in life, we kind of put it in our book, and this is literally what you do in this book. So what were some of the bands earlier in music that really influenced how you played?
Yeah, so growing up, there was a lot of 80s, 70s, 60s CCM. My mother was a believer. I grew up in a Christian household, so always Christian radio was playing. So a lot of like Petra, Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, Sandy Patty, just some of the like early Christian music when it was kind of evolving. But then I started exploring music kind of later in life. I started getting into like really old music. I saw people were into bands like Zeppelin and the Beatles, and that was always weird to me. I didn't really have that as a kid. So then I can't remember if it was my mother or father. They did introduce disco into the picture, so which was always fun. John Travolta disco music. I don't know, but then I started exploring. I got really into '90s music. I just fell in love. I mean, '90s was the best. Gen X, what's up? And so that's where you had like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins. So I really dove into a lot of rock music.
Well, I don't know if you know, but Smashing Pumpkins is going to be here this year in Boston.
Get out of here!
Yeah,
I'm
man.
surprised.
They're going to be playing with I think Green Day.
Look at that. Yeah, I remember when Green Day came out. And, so I took this exploration. I guess as a Christian, you would say, took an exploration into secular music.
Yeah.
And fell in love with it. I fell in love when I finally listened to the Beatles, and I was like, what is this? And fell in love with the White Album and U2, a band called Echo and the Bunnymen. I could just carry on.
Like Muse, Radiohead, and all these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed those bands as well. Radiohead, I was really big into Radiohead for a while.
Yeah.
I got into vinyl. And just really started to build a collection of music. And then the good old Napster days. I don't know if you remember Napster.
Oh, yeah.
In the early 2000s, where you could get free music.
That and LimeWire.
Yeah, so we'd line up like 100 songs, and then a week later they'd download.
McAfee made a lot of money those days.
Yeah.
Virus, antivirus. Well, so do you remember the first time that you got like a major shift within an instrument that you really wanted? It was like you finally got it, whether it was mom bought it or maybe somebody that was dear to you bought it?
Yeah, there was a turning point. Well, first vocally was something that I began to explore. I'm not I wouldn't consider myself to be a great singer, but I love to sing.
I don't know about that, man. You guys got to check this guy out because honestly, if you guys just look up Aaron Rios, one of my favorite songs is Hiding Place, and it's really, really meaningful to me. I listen to it a lot. It's actually in one of my playlists. And so you explore vocals.
Yeah, that was something that I started to explore. Actually, funny enough, that exploration came out of a time when I was in middle school. I was in a bus, and I'll never forget, I was picked on. I was bullied as a kid. And, I remember kids telling me to shut up. I was pretty hyperactive. And I remember one kid said, I don't remember exactly who it was, but I remember him saying, "You need to shut up. Your voice is so annoying." And just like that initial seed of "you have talent" stayed with me, that phrase stayed with me. And I became real quiet. I actually became shy. And so it wouldn't be until a couple of years later after I moved out of Miami that I ended up in a little Baptist church. And I was in a youth group, and they invited me to sing a song. I don't know why they invited me, but they did. They invited me to sing "Awesome God" by Rich Mullins, and they gave me the lead part to sing it. And I actually have it on tape still.
Oh, wow.
I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I still have it on tape. I don't know how I
like
have it on
VHS?
tape. No, actually,
like audio tape?
I took a cassette tape, and I transferred it to an MP3, in the early 2000s.
Oh, dude, we got to put that up there as soon as we can. Yeah,
I shouldn't have said that. It's somewhere.
I'm gonna have to haunt you for that, like, dude. Okay. With vocals, I think it's really important, right? For a lot of families that are watching right now, they have there's a lot of kids that are in the community that, as you know, music and instruments themselves are a lot more affordable nowadays, and it's also easier to access. What would be some advice that you have for parents out there that they're like, I want to put my son or my daughter into this, connect them into music or maybe music teachers and so forth, but maybe they're not financially where they should be or where they can be, what would be your advice to those parents? But because, in your case, right, somebody had to tell mom, right, Miss Mayo, like, hey, you got to get him a piano. You got to do something about this.
Yeah, I think it all begins as a seed. Like, parents, if you can recognize even an inkling of talent, anything that a kid will look like, ooh, what are you doing? There's a potential. You've captivated them for a minute. And so lean into that. And a lot of us just brush that off. Like, go away, you're bothering me. I hate to say it that way, but I know that parents can sometimes think a kid is being nosy or but like they may be, something is happening in those moments. And so like pull them into that and go, do you like that? My daughter started playing, guitar, and she's getting involved in instruments. And so I'm trying to take her to concerts, and we're trying to go to one later this year and just lean into that. So I think it begins with somebody needs to plant a seed, and you can plant it either way. It can be a seed of encouragement, or it actually could be a seed of deterrent. You don't want to deter kids unless it's bad stuff, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. And what would you encourage parents to do as their kids begin to develop? I think sometimes parents get discouraged when the kids are starting to practice, they're starting to play, but then a lot of adults feel like, no, he should be more into it. He should be practicing more. Is it like because they're not in love with it? Is it because parents' expectations are way too high? Or maybe there's something else going on? What would be your suggestion for parents that are going through that?
Yeah, I can't speak to every instance, but I can tell you this, that when you finally encourage your kid to get involved in like band and they bring home that kazoo or whatever, what do you call that? The flute?
The recorder?
Yeah, it's like, da, 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 squeak, squeak. Now you're dealing with the squeaky saxophone. I have sat through countless, middle school recitals where all the instruments are like squeaking and you've got to push through that. So I really think it begins parents, like if you're going to be encouraging your kids to do these things, you're going to be a part of that. You're committed to the good and the bad. It's kind of like a marriage, right? For better or worse. But I think that's what ultimately anybody needs. Whether you're playing a sport, whether you're into anything, like you need some encouragement. And so something like music or singing, it really exposes you. Like you're gonna hear the squeak, you're gonna hear the bad notes, like you're totally exposed. And so what do you do when you're trying to encourage someone in something that they're not good at the moment? You've got to be a visionary for your kids. Like we've got to be people of vision, whether you're doing something for your community, whether you're doing something anywhere, not just in the musical realm, but in any place where there is potential, you've got to persevere towards that potential.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I love that. And I want to encourage, right, a lot of parents, as you guys heard Pastor Aaron, it was Miss Mayo that planted a seed in mom and was like, you got to get him a piano. And look what has happened years and years later. Now there's multiple albums, right? Now there's a book about worship and so much more. So you never know what you investing into your child, what the fruit will be. As long as you keep sowing, and nourishing, right, that seed that has been planted, great and amazing things will happen. So a nod and kudos to Ms. Mayo and her family, and that we wish them the best, right? But we'll be right back with more about Pastor Aaron, the beginnings, and maybe the struggles that were faced during writing this book, and some other questions that we have for Aaron Rios. We'll be right back. Awesome. So, Pastor, tell us a little bit about, when people live in a secular world, a lot of the challenges usually are like stress, financial stress, things like that. But as we know, people that are in the faith, we tend to get battles that are very different. Sometimes they're spiritual battles. What were some of the highlight spiritual battles you faced outside of the, you lost like the whole manuscript. Outside of that, what was some of the highlight spiritual battles that you had in the process of writing this book?
That's a great question. So spirituality is expressed through physicality. And so most people are engaged or entangled in some type of a spiritual tension or conflict. The word the secular world would use, like if you're not a person of faith, if you're not a believer, anything like that, if you don't ascribe to that, what we would call that is emotional tensions. So a lot of people are dealing with emotional tensions. And so kind of an easy way to kind of sum that up is the things that afflict you that are unseen. So people get up and they feel a certain way. I don't know why I feel this way. And then we try to medicate that. So a believer would lean into that and say, hey, there's emotional, mental stresses, and then additionally, there's unseen forces that may be pushing that. And so I could say specifically in the instance of writing this book, there was a lot of mental pushback. As I'm writing things, I realize I'm exposing myself. I mentioned talent can expose you, except you don't really know how people are going to receive that on the other end. And I'm beginning to write about things that are all around us in the realm of church, in the realm of music. And if you know musicians are very protective. Musicians kind of run like gangs. They run in packs. Like if you don't have the same gear, I know growing up when I was in bands, we used to get with people that had the same like gear and equipment and taste and preferences. It starts to get really divided. And so I'm coming in and with a pen, a broad stroke, kind of addressing this whole genre. And so I think that a lot of the spiritual attack, if you want to call it that, really came about questioning myself. Like, is this something that I want to step into? Is this something that I want to talk about? Because I might lose a lot of friends in writing something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think there was a lot of like internal challenges that I would ascribe to me in a form of spiritual attack.
Yeah. Well, when I was writing my book, it was very sensual, right? That first book, that poetry, it was very sensual. So I was like, oh my gosh, the faith community is going to bash me. Like, why are you writing about this? And in my head, I'm like, no, go read Song of Solomon, go read Song of I'm like, don't bash me for that. But so what were some of the emotional tensions that you faced as you were, other than like, oh my gosh, some of these people are going to write this or read this and they're really close to me. Like, what are they going to think of me? What are some of those emotional tensions? Or again, going back to like the spiritual warfare that you faced as you wrote this book?
Yeah, I think the first tension that I dealt with is I don't want to come off as someone who is claiming to be a guru. Like I'm the master of this just because I've written a book. I'm the know-it-all. I'm not. I'm a student. I'm asking questions. I want others to ask questions. I think that's the heartbeat. I don't want to present myself as something that I'm not. The second thing is I didn't want to present myself in this over-cynical, over-critical person. Dany, you know me. I'm not a cynical person. Optimism is one of my gifts. I'm very optimistic. I like to believe the best. I like to hope the best. And so I wanted to be careful that I didn't sound accusational or overly critical. I want to try to broadly help people begin to ask questions in the music realm. Like, why do I do this? One of the things we're doing at our church is going to be releasing this statement, and we've already done it with some of the team, is leading with your why. I think that's good in life. And I think that's good in any trade, is why am I doing what I'm doing? If I'm going to find fulfillment in something and purpose, then I need to know why I'm doing something and not just kind of aimlessly doing things.
Well, when I mentor and counsel a lot of people, as you know, I do clinical therapy, but I also do mentoring in the community. I always tell people, your why has to be greater than your why not. Why are you writing this book? Or in other words, like let's say you're in a transition to get a new job. Why should you leave? Why should you not leave? If your why is greater than your why not, you got to take action. You got to start moving. And there's certain things that I feel like, yeah, but I'm comfortable here. My hours are flexible.
Yeah.
But going back to writing a book, right? Like my why I should write this book should always be greater than my why not. There's a billion reasons why you shouldn't. But your why should always be more profound, more highlighted. So what were some of the reasons why you felt like I have to write this book?
Well, it's right in that same tension of the whys need to be greater. Because if you don't examine your whys, you're going to be left with either why didn't I do that, or you're going to be left with why is this happening to me in life, right? And so we have a lot of people that didn't prepare, they didn't ask the whys, and so now before them is why is this happening to me? Because we didn't weigh the balance. In the book of, like you mentioned, Song of Solomon is a book of wisdom that will challenge us to ask deeper questions all throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
But back to your initial question, the whys that pushed me to write this book is really from a personal experience. I spent a long season away from the church. I was kind of chasing the music dream. I was in rock bands. Speaking of being influenced by the 90s, I got into some indie rock bands in the early 2000s. They called them emo bands. I had really long hair. I was about 35 pounds lighter. And,
well, they say the Holy Spirit weighs 35 pounds. So, that's probably what it is.
Yes, exactly what it is. Absolutely. No. Yeah, and so I remember kind of getting back into church, and I remember just being blessed by the music. I was like, wow, music's really grown, it's changed. But I also sensed there was a similarity in what I saw like in clubs and in a lot of the music that I saw. And I noticed that a lot of the goosebumps and a lot of the feels that I had just being out in the Hard Rock Cafe or being in some of these bars and clubs as I traveled, you felt good. And I remember those same exact sensations, but as I would have conversations with people, people would say things like, oh, I just feel God. And I think the climax of that was at one point, somebody told me they went to a show in Vegas, and they went to go see this secular singer, and this was a Christian. And they said, I went to go see the singer, and they said, that person is so anointed. That's a phrase that's thrown around in church a lot, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know what that phrase means, it's just a phrase that sometimes people will use to say, hey, I sense God on that person or whatever. And usually they'll say, I got a goosebump or the hair stood up. I remember them saying that to me, and I was really troubled by that because I wasn't so sure about that. That person is saying a lot about things that wouldn't really be church friendly. So I'm not, right. I was like, you're anointed? I said, I'm not so sure about that. I think you just got the feels, And then I thought about phrases that, Dany, maybe you've heard me talk about, like, my soul has been stimulated. I feel it in the soul. Yeah. Well, like a lot of jazz, a lot of R&B, a lot of blues is like soul stirring. Yeah. And then I thought about these delicious restaurants in Florida, soul food, right? And so I realized that we can externally appeal to the soul. And what if the church has missed it? And what they're claiming to be God or the anointing is their soul is being stirred. And I really believe God touches us somewhere deeper than just goosebumps and the willies.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's more than the spidey sense, right?
Yes,
it's more than that.
Spidey tingle.
And I think, like, as we talk about even instruments that you use, like I said in the beginning, you're multi-talented. You play different instruments, but now an instrument that is being more profound in your life is a pen, right? Or whether you use a word processor like Microsoft Word or whatever it was. Who were some of the authors that influenced you as you were writing this book?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'm going to say something that's really funny about this. So when I started writing this book, I was not a big reader. Now, I'd read obviously through college and stuff like that, but there wasn't anything that profoundly stood out to me.
Yeah.
But I began to read as I began to write the book. And so it caused me to go backwards and really make some adjustments. One of the books that really impacted me was a book called Erasing Hell by Francis Chan.
Dude, yeah.
Yes, it has nothing to do with worship. No, it was actually a rebuttal to a book by a man named Rob Bell. And he wrote a book called Love Wins, which was a really big book. That phrase "love wins" has now been adopted by certain communities, but it actually originated with him. And his book was really just kind of like this conversation about hell and the afterlife. So, but his conclusion was there was no hell. Francis Chan wrote this book, and it really impacted me. And then I started reading some autobiographies that would probably bore you right now if I were to tell you about them. But I would say that Francis Chan, his conversational pieces, was probably the most recent book that I had read when this book was coming into being.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is your instrument of choice right now?
Honestly, I love playing the piano.
What is your piano currently?
What kind of piano do I play on?
Mm-hmm.
I am playing right now on a Yamaha. I think it's an XD70, and I'm using it as a MIDI interface. And so what that means is that the sounds are coming off of a computer.
Okay, yeah. Nice.
And I've been able to modify my own sound. So that's quite the leap these days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like a whole other language. Oh my gosh, I'm like,
it is, yeah.
The who modifier?
Yes, yeah.
No, that's awesome, man. Well, let's get a little bit deeper into the roots. So one of the things that was really impacting me was like the input and output. So let me just kind of set a foundation for the question. When I started going to church, as you know, I'm a lot newer in the faith than yourself. I started when I was 21 years old, just about to turn 21. And for me, you know, I was always really deep into like punk bands, really deep into like indie bands, deep into like backyard shows and things like that. And I would actually make fun of emo kids, right? So when I came to the faith, it was really, 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 really difficult for me to find music that I liked. I actually didn't even like hip hop before. It was only until I came to the faith where I was like, okay, I'm starting to actually like some of the hip hop that I hear. What are some things that you encourage, especially young people? Because I feel like young people tends to really either attract or, I don't want to say withdraw, but maybe create barriers for young folks that want to get into the faith, but it's like just the music isn't there. I don't know if you ever experienced that as you were, you know, growing into becoming the musician that you are. So to set up the question is, what would you encourage young folks to do that want to get into the faith but are challenged by they're not connecting, whether it's worship or some form of like Christian music, like Christian hip hop or Christian this or Christian that?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. Well, first of all, the draw to Christianity, it's not about what I can carry along into it, okay? In the sense of if I was going to move, when I moved up here from Florida, I brought a U-Haul with me, and I was just changing location, you know? So I brought my U-Haul and I brought my pod, and then I got to my new location, I unloaded everything. And I think we have this idea of I'm just going to affiliate myself with the faith. You know, okay, I'm a Christian now. And it's just a tag or a badge that we can wear. I think it fundamentally begins with understanding that when I come to Jesus, I bring him my entire life. I bring him my U-Haul. And then he's going to unload it for me. And he's going to also have a dumpster next door as he's unloading. And he's going to say, you can bring this into your new house, but this has to go, this has to go. And so there's actually a painful time. And I know this might not be attractive, you know, if we want people to come to faith and you're actually telling people, listen, God's going to rummage through your house. He's going to rummage through your belongings, but he's going to lovingly fill your house with everything that benefits you, everything that's good. Why? Because your environment impacts you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that culture doesn't seem to understand that is if I involve myself in things that are just private, like what's it your business what I do with my body, or what is your business whatever kind of drugs I do or whatever I want. I'm doing it in the safety and the privacy of my own home. But you know what happens, what we do in private affects our environment, and it affects our greater surroundings right now. And so culture doesn't often understand that, but the same thing happens with what you do with your body and what you do with your mind. And so what I fill my body with is going to affect my health. What I fill my mind with is going to affect my thinking. It's going to affect my mental and emotional health as well. And so all that leads to, what am I putting in, right? As you've mentioned a couple of times, input, output. Whatever I eat is going to demonstrate itself in the gym. Whatever I fill my head with is going to demonstrate through my emotional health as well. And so on and so forth. And so I think that a lot of young people that you feel like, man, if I come to church and I become a Christian, there isn't anything that I like. You may be coming to Christianity for the wrong reasons, because really I'm coming to faith and I'm coming to Christianity because I'm really coming to Christ. I don't confuse coming to a church for coming to Christ.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm coming to Christ because I'm a wretched sinner. Any way I want to paint that, any way I want to make that sound like socially acceptable and fun and friendly. Listen, we're getting ready to go to Easter. And Easter is about Jesus dying and resurrecting, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's brutal. It's brutal and it's gory, and so we try to paint it up with eggs and bunnies. But the reality is, it's about a man who hung on a cross. It's about blood that was shed, and that's like not fun to talk about, and it's weird even for some people. But at the foundation of this, it's like Jesus traded his life so that I can have his, not so I could keep mine.
Right.
And so I have that responsibility then to come to Christ for, number one, the right reasons. And if he was willing to give up everything for me, then certainly I was willing to give up nirvana for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as I get closer to getting married, I realize how many things I do have to be okay with letting go. It's like accepting, right? I have to grieve that I can't dress like a high school teenager anymore. I have to accept that there's certain things that my significant other isn't going to be okay with, and that's okay. Like, one of the things that I'm also learning as we think about input and output, especially through worship, it's not just the music that you're going to output in worship. It's going to be some of the people that you surround yourself with. It's going to be some of the entertainment that you consume. It's going to be some of the stress factors in your life. As a poet, often a lot of the things that I challenge with or go through, it transcends. So what did you learn about yourself as you were writing this book? Like maybe 2 or 3 things that you could say, I really learned that I was A, B, and C about myself as I wrote.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I learned is that the best poison is always wrapped in candy. And so they used to say around Halloween time, parents check the candy. I don't know how true that is, if that's folklore or whatever.
Like cyanide and polio, anthrax candy.
Yeah, don't eat the apples with the, stuff. Yeah, so, but I'm realizing I think one of the realizations is, wow, I have been consuming through music and through entertainment and through all those media platforms. I've been consuming poison. But it's wrapped in sweetness. I feel good in one area, but then later on it exposes itself in another area. So I realize, whoa, no wonder I'm dealing with certain stressors or certain patterns of anxiety or certain patterns of depression because I'm or lust or like struggling, to control my thought life because the music and the melodies sounded so beautiful. It was sweetness, but the content that was being poured into my soul was the poison. So I think that was the first revelation. The second revelation that I had was actually in the way Jesus interacts in John chapter 4 with a prostitute. The word prostitute that I'm using right now may be a little bit harsh. We just know she might be more scandalous, but some have suggested that this woman was as far as a prostitute.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, that he travels into this area known as Samaria. And that's an area that, as I understand it, a lot of Jewish rabbis would have stayed away from. But he goes into this region that he wasn't really welcomed in, that most people would have bypassed. They would have just skipped it and went around it, extended their journey to go to Jerusalem. But Jesus walks directly in to meet with this scandalous woman, which is wild in of itself as well, because not only do Jews not go into this region, but Jews also, especially a rabbi, would not associate with a woman because that just wasn't like cool to do in that day. So the thought that just impacted me is, if I stick to my religion, okay, I'm talking about like religion, like the rules of religion, and I bypass Samaria, I'm going to exhaust myself. It's going to extend my journey. It's going to make me weary. And Jesus knew that. He's bringing a whole crew behind him. And I thought about this, how weary I have been trying to adhere to the rules that I think will please God. Sometimes God calls you into Samaria, into the uncomfortable, into the weird regions, into the place of rejection in order to deal with something bigger. So that was a wild revelation as well. Like, wow, where is God going to take me if I stick to just, being a typical Sunday Christian and, I go to church on Easter and Christmas and I don't have any depth to me and I just stick by the rule. Well, God's pleased with me. No, but sometimes by going further, God takes you into Samaria.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is in there, right? When he arrives in Samaria, he meets with this woman and he doesn't condemn her. He doesn't throw stones at her. Now, it doesn't mean Jesus is all cushy and, flicking flowers and daisies and skipping and hopping around. I think
rolling
we get this
down
image.
hills.
Yeah, rolling down hills. And, I like to drink a Coke with the word. I think some people think that. But we do see this side of Jesus that he is like speaking an exact word to this woman in John chapter 4. She's telling him about her life, and he's asking him for water. And he just says to her, the type of worship that God is seeking, and the type of worshipers God is seeking are those who worship him in spirit and in truth. Mm-hmm. And then he affirms her that she tells the truth about her sin. He says, how many husbands do you have? And she says, I don't have any husbands. He's like, you're right. He's like, you've had like 3 or 4, and the one you have right now isn't even your husband. Mm-hmm. And she's shocked.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all that's needed to turn her life around. She becomes an evangelist in that region. So, yeah, I answered your question in a very long format. But there was just a lot of things that I began to struggle and wrestle with while writing this book.
Well, you're a really busy person. You have a podcast, you have a book, you do music, you're a pastor, you're a father, you're a husband. You have all these things going on. How do you find the balance between having to write this, not having to write, but feeling led to write this book within the 7-year span, and then also being intentional and engaging, especially with your daughters?
Yeah, you're always going to perform best in your passions. Mm-hmm. And so something cool that I don't really tell people is everything I do is passion-based. I just need to make sure the fuel in the passion is the right fuel. Otherwise, you'll break down. And so when I was not a pastor, when I was not committed to Christ, I was burning with the wrong passions, and those passions will burn you up. But when I yielded my life to the Lord, it took a while to kind of get the oil change in my life, to kind of do the overhaul in the system. But I have dedicated my life to only do the things that I'm deeply passionate about. Why else would I do things that I'm not passionate about? I think a lot of people are miserable because they're not living out of any passion. But if they would take the time, true passion, and Dany, you're a passionate guy, man. Not only did you write a sweet love poetry book, but just everything you do, man, you do it with passion, right? So that it's possible to live out of your passion points, and passion burns. Yeah. All right. And so as long as the fire is burning, you can keep going. So I want to try to do everything that I can out of passion.
And one of the things that I heard you say in another interview. Yeah, there you go. Which actually, Pastor Sarah, your wife, interviewed you, which was really, really beautiful. And in the midst of a lot of things that I've heard you say, one of the things that really I held on to was like when you mentioned, sometimes people compliment you and say, you really sound like that band. You really sound like that artist. And at first sight, it's like, whoa, that's so cool. It's a compliment because that's what I was aiming for, right? Yeah. I want to sound like these great bands. But then as you begin to reflect and you take a step back, it's like, wait a minute. Now I'm just kind of like a doppelganger. Now I'm just kind of like a mirror or a copy paste of what I was looking up to instead of being original. So whether it's in music or as an author, as a pastor, what keeps you original and not a copy of something that's influenced you?
Oh man, that's a great question. I do dive into this in the book regarding the input output. To go back to that, is that we are sponges and we are containers, and so we are a compilation of everything that's been poured into our lives, and because of that, originality can actually be lost. I mean, from the way I dress, the way I do my hair, originality can be lost. Everybody is modeling something or somebody else, but deep inside of Dany and deep inside of me and deep inside of every person is an original design, an original species, which contradicts like some of the Darwin stuff, but there's an original design for every single person, and you're an original species, so am I. And so how do we get in touch with that? And you don't get in touch with that by, sitting around and chanting and, zoning out and, that's not, it's actually the author, your creator has etched that originality into you. And so it's actually possible to access that, but you've got to rid yourself of sometimes you've got to rid yourself of the things that cover you, right? So we're all covered in clothing. We're not going to run around and take our clothing off here, but the things that keep me from being exposed. I mean, think of Adam and Eve in the Bible. The Bible says that they had no shame and they had nothing. They had no clothes on, so they were running around naked. And so because of that, they were untainted and everything was exposed. There was no shame. I think that what bottles up a person's originality is fear. What if they don't like me? If they really see, who I really am? Or shame. I don't think I'm good enough. But I think the power of the Holy Spirit removes shame, and he removes some of those layers that just life can put on you. And a lot of those things will bury a person's originality. It'll bury your design. Your design will get buried in culture.
The way I kind of picture it, Pastor, as you're speaking, and this is going to be like weirdly poetic, right?
Sure, go for it.
Is Eve was smothered, covered, and laced in the dew of Eden, but after she fell into sin, she started to cover herself up and became an image or an identity of who she originally was not created to be. So what was supposed, or the areas of her life, which is her intimate parts, I would assume so, that were originally supposed to be smothered, covered, and laced in the dew of the garden, were now covered by something that was not allowing that dew to touch her anymore in that intimacy. And so I question, like, what are some things that the Lord originally placed in us, etched us, or even has carved us out to be, but then we put up these things that are like, Lord, carve me, but not there. You know, we kind of hold his wrist and it's like, not there yet. Don't etch that out. Like, we put a covering, for lack of better wording, like what is it, fig leaves?
Yeah.
And we don't allow the Lord to etch out that area. And so I love when we talk about originality, because you definitely have an original voice. I've always admired how much musical talent you have. And we do want to get deeper into some other questions, so we'll be right back with Pastor Aaron Rios as we talk about some other questions that I think are going to be pretty creative, and I don't think Pastor Aaron sees them coming, so we'll be right back. Now they can hear us. Yeah. We were just talking about you. No. Yeah, no. So, Pastor, so now that you have this book out and everything like that, what are some things that you feel relieved about? Because when I finished, I was like, oh my gosh, it's finally over. Oh, wait a minute. It's not over. Now the battle begins. Now I have to put the book out there. Now I have to promote it. Now I have to market it. Now I have to advertise it. Now I have to do blah, 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 blah. What are some of the challenges that you're facing now that everything's, finished with the publishing piece, but now kind of like phase 2 begins?
Oh, the weirdest thing happened is, we have a wonderful church community, and the last thing I would ever want to do is present myself as like trying to sell a book to my church. We even talked about that.
Yeah.
But a couple of people in the church said, Pastor, people want to buy your book.
Yes.
And so that was the weird. Yeah, right. You would think, and I like to give things away so often, but several people advised me, you only have so many copies, and there was a lot of money that went into this. You might not want to do that because you won't have the means to keep going. So that was a really wild challenge. And so we did make it available for a few weeks. Of course, it's online. It's available. It's doing pretty good.
Where can people find it right now?
It's currently on Amazon. It's on every online platform.
Okay.
There is an ebook. There isn't an audiobook yet, but that's something I want to tackle that you've encouraged me to do. And so that's coming.
Dude, you have to do the audiobook. Pastor Aaron has such a good voice for audiobooks, guys. Like, if you guys haven't heard the audiobook, even mine, it's online as well. Yeah. And you guys can hear Pastor Aaron's voice. It sounds like a very, I remember we were talking about this, it sounds like a Tom Clancy kind of novel where it's like very like soldier-esque kind of thing, But so they can find it online. What about a website or like maybe social media?
Yeah, absolutely. Visit me at aaronrios.com, and through there you can link to all of my social media and stay up with music and all the other things I have going on. Yeah.
What would it be like if there was one chapter in the book that you could recommend, like one specific one that you would say, if you're only going to read one chapter in this book, read this one. Which one would it be?
Funny enough, it would be the introduction.
Okay, tell us about it.
So the introduction really just begins with kind of how the book, the conception of the book. I went to an event about a decade ago, and it was a civic center. It was filled with people. I was, in the moment. I was celebrating. I was worshiping. It was a Christian event. We were worshiping, and it's just like I wouldn't say I had an out of body experience, but I had kind of like a pause as I was kind of going through the motions, and I just thought about where we were. The civic center, like a lot of civic centers, are kind of in a not the best part of town. I kind of noticed it, kind of like Greyhounds. Greyhound bus stations tend to not be in the best part of towns. And I remember leaving the civic center to get a bottle of water, and as I'm walking through, there's some pretty shady people on the streets, and I just thought, like, here I am. One moment, I am in this environment with like explosive revival happening, right? There was like 60,000 people in there just loving on Jesus. And then the next minute, it's quiet, and I'm in the hood. And I'm thinking, like, how is it that we're having this moment in this auditorium, and then right outside is all this depravity? And it made me think of, in the Old Testament, Moses would meet with the presence of God in a tent. And like, just imagine like a thin veil of fabric separated the entire nation from the actual presence of God. And it's like, oh man, if we could just strip the veil, like, you know, and just let it flood through the streets. Like, so that's kind of how this began for me. It was like, what's happening in church is meant to be so powerful. It's meant to flood outside the veil and overtake our communities.
What is book 2 right now?
Well, that's the second challenge, actually. You mentioned it, because the challenge is to not start writing that. So I am actually working on another book. I have quite a few in me. I think you'd understand it as an author and as a poet. Yeah, I do. I'm working right now on a book called The God of Perhaps. And this is a phrase you see often. You know, it's like, I know God told me to do this, but perhaps, and that's a phrase you see in scripture. Like, you see Jonathan and his armor bearer in the book of Kings. They're like, hey, we could weary ourselves going on this really long journey, or we could just cut right through the mountains. But there happens to be an army of about 300 giants. So I don't know. What do you think we should do? And Jonathan's like, why don't we try let's take the shortcut, and perhaps God will give us victory. And so the book's right now, it's just dealing with clarity in the middle of uncertainty. I think a lot of people need that right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You know, as I get to see a landscape of the last 5 to 10 years within secular music, I see a lot of artists proclaiming to be Christian now, right? We got Justin Bieber, we got Kanye West, we got, and even in the Spanish community as well, and other kind of languages, all of these people coming out, and like, even in reggaeton, I think recently Daddy Yankee was like, yeah, I'm a Christian too now. But then sometimes it's very unfortunate where I tell people, you know, like, when you started, no one, well, maybe somebody, but it was very little bit of people that set this extremely high expectation on you to fully change from one person to another in a day after you proclaimed that you were a Christian. Yet with these celebrities, when they say, I'm a Christian now, we kind of expect like a full-blown revival, like a transition, complete, just, you know, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so when we see that in the music world, because, you know, we're talking about worship, when we see that in the music world and we see like, even Kanye West, right, he brought out a gospel album. What are your thoughts about that, especially when they're, you know, they have the resources to pull up a gospel album in like a year, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But then the lifestyle is not there. The example is not there. The relationship, maybe I personally don't feel like I can speak to, because everybody has their own individual relationship with God. But like, as the word says, right, you'll know them by their fruits. So what are your thoughts on that? Because from my perspective, having listened to like Kanye West and things like that, not like his secular music or even like the gospel-ish kind of music, but seeing that he's doing all of these things, and a lot of like people in the faith were admiring that, they were going to his events and this and that. But then you see the lifestyle that he's choosing to live, or you see the behavior that he's choosing to transcend. It brings a lot of confusion. It brings a lot of, I feel like it seeps in some toxicity, and it seeps in confusion in people. And they're like, oh, if that's what a Christian is, then I'm a Christian too. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Wow, I like what you just said. If that's what a Christian is, then I'm a Christian too. Honestly, the angle I'm coming from is the church, or a lot of Christians, are so quick to hold people to standards that they themselves don't hold themselves to. You know, if we had a little bit more grace and said, hey, look, just because this person can sing a song, I mean, listen, churches are filled with thousands upon thousands, millions of people. Every Sunday, they're singing songs, you know, half-hearted songs. They got their hands lifted in these sanctuaries, and they're singing songs with words like, God, I give you my everything. Right? You're giving them your everything until you walk out of the church, and now you're cussing out people in the streets and you're being rude to your neighbors, right? So like we're holding Kanye West to a higher standard than we don't even hold ourselves to these standards. So I think it's a double-edged sword. Maybe when we see someone on a platform and they're not living up to what we think a Christian should be, that should be a reminder to number one, check myself. Am I living up to what I believe a Christian should be? Am I living up to what the Bible says a Christian should be? And then, but then there is another side to it, is that not everyone who says "Lord, Lord" is a Christian. And the unfortunate side of it is that Christian music is not, or worship music is not worship music in a biblical sense. It's a genre of music, like rap, hip hop, right? R&B, worship. Well, just because it has a title worship doesn't mean it's pleasing to God. And so I think we just got to slow down and we've got to educate ourselves. It doesn't mean we're disqualifying people. I think we have to judge righteously. It's become common to say don't judge, but that's not what the Bible teaches. It says judge righteously. Get the beam out of your eye first.
There you go.
Then you can judge righteously. And so this whole thing, you get his neck tattoo, only God can judge me. Man, if you've got that tattoo, that is a scary thing because God's going to judge you. He's going to judge me. And so but he's commanded us to judge as well. And so there's got to be some grace. There's got to be wisdom in it.
And it's not biblical that I know of that only God can judge somebody.
No.
You know, I believe even we talk about like Paul, right? And a lot of folks, we will be held up to a standard, but we're allowed to judge. It doesn't mean like go bash people around. I think it gives us a better sense of what we can do or what we should do moving forward. Now, some of the questions that I know some people might want me to ask, especially because we are in Massachusetts and some people might be interested that are watching right now that would be interested in going to a church. I know they could find us at Garden City Church at 140 Bridge Street, right? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the services and some of the things that we have coming up and going on. I know we have Easter coming up and so forth.
Yeah, we've got our Easter service coming up like any church. So number one, I would encourage anybody, even if you're not in the area, just get to a church. Make sure the church is a Bible-believing church. I think that's most important. But we would love to have you come at Garden City Church as well.
Yeah.
So we're a young, old church.
Yeah.
We're a young, old church. And I'm not talking about the people. Actually, the church is a church plant from about 16 years ago. I stepped in when the church was about 11 years old. And the invitation to the church was what you would call a revitalization. So it was about 11 years old, but it went through a season where the pastor had left and just an incredible community of people that my wife and I have had the privilege of stepping into and piloting. And so that was 5 years ago. So I say young, old, because we've been there now for 5 years. We're in our 5th year. 2.5 of those years was, the COVID dilemma and the pandemic and all that. So that really kind of makes the timeline kind of wonky.
What's the best restaurant in Beverly people can visit after they go to church?
Hey, the best restaurant. I'm giving some shout outs to restaurants.
Other than your house.
They better send me some coupons if I give some shout outs. So I can tell you that when I came to Beverly has some incredible restaurants, like up and down Rantoul Street and up and down Bridge Street. There's some great restaurants. So, man, I don't know. If I say their name, they've got to send me a coupon.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll have to hit them up.
Yeah. So there's a great chicken place in a chicken sandwich, if you like chicken sandwiches. It's called Flip the Bird.
Oh, I love it, dude. Yeah.
Yes. And the sandwiches are awesome there. And then there's a counterpart. I think they're rivals. I think there's one around here called Yas Chicken. And it is yas good.
Yeah, there you go. All right. And I think it's also really important for us to be able to ask this because, it sets a tone for some of the viewers that are watching, especially folks that are interested in a more diverse church. I know that we're a very diverse church, but one of the things that I really enjoy about our church is that we have different forms of music. It's not just like all Hillsong or all, like sometimes you even go into leading worship with some hymns, which I really appreciate. Like, that wasn't the atmosphere that I grew up in, but it really mixes it all up for us. It gives us a sense of like more is going on here, but it also touches the heart of a more diverse community. So I just want to say I appreciate that. And for those of you that are interested, can you give us again the contact information before we go into our last segment here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Garden City Church, 140 Bridge Street in Beverly. Probably the best way to reach me is going to be pastor@gardencitychurch.net, and that'll take you into kind of everything that you need.
And again, for the book, Spirit and Truth, Reclaiming the Heart of Worship, go to aaronrios.com. We'll be right back, guys, with time to honor somebody that's very near and dear to Pastor. We'll be right back. All right, so guys, we're going to give time to Pastor Aaron to be able to honor somebody that's on his heart. So the time with you, Pastor.
And I remember you telling me the microphones are left on, so... I really appreciate that, Danny. Over the last 19 years, I'm in my 19th year of marriage. I have 5 children with 1 more on the way. It's going to be 6. That's incredible. 5 are girls. And this 6th one is a boy.
Yeah, bro.
So that's pretty wild and pretty exciting. Woo. But, I've had someone constantly on that journey with me. I would neither have the 19 years of marriage nor the children if it wasn't for my wife. And so I appreciate the opportunity to give a shout out and to really honor my wife. Over the years, she has been the silent support, not always silent, but often the silent support that's enabled me to pursue my passions. She has dealt with me in traveling, late nights in studios. It's just, even as I'm wrapping up a master's program, and she has shouldered so much. And I just want to take a minute to honor my wife, Sarah Rios, tell her how much I love her, how grateful I am, and how much I appreciate your support. This book wouldn't be here without your love, without your support and your encouragement. So I appreciate you and love you.
Yeah,
Baby.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much for being here with us, Pastor Aaron. God bless you so much, guys. If you guys want to check out the book, Spirit and Truth, Reclaiming the Heart of Worship, make sure you guys go to aaronrios.com. It's going to be available, or it already is available on Amazon, on their website, social media. Please go follow, subscribe, put a like, and make sure that you send some emails and comment down below. What are some people or maybe some questions that you have for Pastor Aaron and some people you would like us to interview, whether they're here in Massachusetts or around the world. God bless you guys, and remember to walk by faith and not by sight. We'll see you guys next time.